Welcome back. It's another episode of Havlicek Stole the Pod. I am your host, Alex Goldberg. With me, as always, is Dr. Justin Quinn and Daniel Dunabedian. And joining us is Bobby Krivitsky. Bobby K, how you doing? It's been a little bit.
I'm doing fantastic. It's been too long, so excited to be back on the pod.
Fabulous. And JQ, what's going on with you in Mexico City?
Oh, well, other than being stuck in traffic for an hour and a half today, as you can see, I've remodeled my office. That's what I was not paying attention to during the Brooklyn game, much like the Celtics were not paying attention to that Brooklyn game. But we can talk about that later.
Yeah, sounds about right. Daniel, what's happening with you, my man?
Nothing much. Been a very busy week, as Bobby knows. We've had games every other day, and we got another one coming up against the Kings and on Sunday too. But can't complain too much, except the weather.
Yeah, certainly can complain about the weather. Just trudged home in the ever-present snow here in Brooklyn. But we're going to make it work. It's fine. Everything is A-okay. The front of my apartment is definitely not soaked with snow runoff from my boots. Anyway, we're going to keep things moving. So on this episode, listen, folks, the trade deadline is coming up. We got to talk about it. That's just what every NBA podcast has to talk about as we start charging forward to that. We're going to do some news, and then we're going to get into a deep dive with Bobby on the trade deadline, what the Celtics might be interested in, what the Celtics can do, what the Celtics have tried to do, the rumors. We're going to break it all down. Let's jump right into it. First off, news really quickly. Boston Celtics have gone 2-2 in their last 4 games. They had an overtime thriller against Brooklyn in which they played very poorly for pretty much the entire game and then decided to win it at the last possible moment with a great Josh McDaniels style out of bounds play from Joe Mazzulla, freeing Hugo Gonzalez for a big 3 to tie the game late. Then they went and faced the Chicago Bulls and lost on a similar play in which the Celtics were the victim of a late corner 3 to win the game from Kevin Huerter. Hell of a shot. And then after that, they took on the Portland Trailblazers minus Denny Avdia, their presumed all-star, and got Robert Williams, Drew Holiday, and gave them a nice solid win, 102-94. And then they got their asses kicked by the Atlanta Hawks. There's no other way to put it. They did not wake up on the right side of the bed as a team. In general, just a pretty poor performance. Joe Mazzulla came very close to fighting the refs. It was a mess all around. So they're 2-2 in the last 4. They are now back to the 3rd seed in the Eastern Conference. The New York Knicks have overtaken them for the 2 seed. What are we thinking about these games, fellas? Bobby, we'll kick it to you first.
Yeah, so first off, with Joe in the technical, I mean, he made Sam Cassell touch earth. So
yeah,
he was pretty fired up about that situation. He explained afterwards, he felt like the same exact scenario had unfolded at the other end of the court. They didn't call, or they called it, and then they didn't call it in favor of the Celtics, where Baylor Shireman clearly got fouled. It leads to Okongwu getting the rebound, going to the free throw line. So that inconsistency was not something he was about to tolerate. Plus, you mentioned what happened overall in that game, Alex. He wanted to spark his team and send a message and try and create this jolt of energy right there. And it certainly got the Garden fired up. And the Celtics, they had a pretty good third quarter led by the second unit, but the starters came back in and just couldn't sustain it in the final frame. So that game very much was what I would call a receipt, where they put 82 points on the Hawks in Atlanta in the first half. And Atlanta, with Dyson Daniels back, from Mazzulla to Pritchard to Jalen, everyone we talked to pointed to just what a defensive menace he is and what a game changer he was, how much harder he made life for them. He had 5 steals in that game. So the Celtics a little bit flat, and that speaks to the time of year we're in, where guys are starting to look ahead to the All-Star break. They're tired. The weather in the Northeast stinks, and in Chicago as well, since they were just in the Midwest. And that's why you get this needed infusion of energy from the rookies and Amare and Ugo, not to just gloss over Jaylen Brown's triple-double and what Peyton Pritchard did in that win against Brooklyn, but they were massive in that win, including obviously the game winner from Gonzalez. But then the next night, you get a rookie mistake where Ugo misplays the top of the action there involving the screen, and that allows Kevin Huerter to ultimately get open in the corner for the game winner. So they've been good, these guys, but you can see the growing pains from both Gonzalez, who has spent the whole year with the parent club, and certainly Amari as he gets more opportunities.
Daniel, JQ, anything else to address from this stretch? The 3-point shooting, the defense, anything like that?
The 3-point shooting in particular, it's been brought up in pressers post-game several times now, particularly in the last game. The built-in kind of, we're going to let them shoot above the break and guard the corner threes, it works unless it doesn't. And I think maybe they're saving this for the postseason, but they need a counter to when that's not working right, because clearly in the last game that was not working right. The Hawks were just cooking them in the first half, and ultimately was too big of a hole to dig out of. So that's something I think that needs to be worked on, and I expect them to work on it if they haven't already, and they're just keeping that in their pocket.
Daniel, anything to add? Yeah,
I think the Nets and Bulls games kind of point to just the variance Joe Mazzulla always talks about post game. Like, one night you're going to get Ugo splashing a three to send it to double OT in the corner. Another night you're going to get Kevin Huerter doing the same thing, and you're going to lose. Like, the margin of error and like just how games can change at the end is pretty crazy. And Joe obviously doesn't want them to get caught up too much in that, get caught up in the result too much. And like Bobby said, we're in like the doldrums of January, so this is a pretty tough time physically and mentally. I mean, I think the Celtics are 5-5 in their last 10 games, so they kind of have to push through this stretch and get to the All-Star break, because this has been like a softer part of their schedule, and I think they're like 3-2 in this stretch or something so far, and it's gonna get harder. So definitely more work to do.
That certainly is true. They have more work to do. Joe Mazzulla, I'm sure, is looking forward to exactly that kind of work, as he loves adversity, as he's told us many times. And the only other thing to note is that the Derek White shooting slump has continued to rear its ugly head. Now, obviously, this is just a recurring thing with Derek White. In December and January, he pretty much always goes into major shooting slumps. But this year, the roster is very different. And so when Derek White goes into a shooting slump, it's not as easy to hide with this team. Speaking of Derek White, he was on an episode of The Young Man and the Three and a crossover pod with his podcast, the White Noise Podcast, featuring Anthony Simons, Peyton Pritchard, and Luka Garza, loaded with Celtics content. Fellas, did any of you listen to this pod?
Yeah, I actually did. Yeah. The story. The story from that, for me, just to say quickly, was I remember Derek White mentioned in his own podcast that there was some call that he got on his birthday from Joe. His co-host asked him about it, but he wouldn't say what he said. But now, months later, he's on The Old Man and the Three, and he finally revealed the story. And he said that on his birthday, I think July 2nd, Joe called him while he was golfing, saying like, "Oh, happy birthday, whatever." And then he just said, "Everybody thinks we're going to suck this year. I love it." And then just hung up. And he was right. And he said he was excited for them to all get back so they could show them what they're capable of and shock the world. And so far, they've pretty much done just that. I mean, 29-18, I think. Not what we expected at first.
Bobby, JQ, any takeaways from what you listened to?
It was a very entertaining episode, so I definitely recommend people go and check it out. And I'm a sucker for when players share their welcome to the NBA moments. And so there's a lot of good ones from Luka Garza squared off against Joel Embiid. And Joel Embiid immediately seeing him, immediately sees him come in and says, "Change the play, get it to me right now." And they just ran it through Embiid 7 times in a row. And Garza hit a couple threes on him, and there was some misinterpreted trash talk there. So the stories there they're always gold in my opinion, and overall it's a very entertaining episode.
For sure. Speaking of podcasts, Jayson Tatum was recently on podcast, and it stirred up a lot of details and controversy because Chris Haynes heard that podcast and maybe heard some other stuff and went and tweeted out that Jayson Tatum is now reevaluating whether he intends to come back this season or not, despite numerous suggestions that he's fully intending to play this year. Now things appear to be a little bit murky. Chris Haynes reportedly said that he was hearing he was getting close, but that things have changed, that Tatum is reconsidering. The That being said, Joe Mazzulla maybe poured a little bit of cold water on that today, saying there's been zero setback. He's progressing naturally, that his recovery is completely on schedule. What are we supposed to make of the mixed messages around Jayson Tatum's possible return? We'll start with you, Bobby.
I think that the motivation to get this out is that he wants to take the temperature down and just right now, I still believe firmly, like being in Detroit for that workout, I didn't look at it and say Jayson Tatum is not going to come back this season. I also didn't look at it and say he's ready to come back in the next couple of weeks. And so those clips and what it has stirred up, I think he just wants everyone to realize that, hey, we're still taking this day by day, week by week, and more gradual. And oh, by the way, if I do come back, I'm not worried about him fitting in. It's still a real thing that has to happen. Like it's not an issue, but they do have to address it. And then secondly, is that you can't expect him to return and just immediately be a top 5 player in the league and return to first team all NBA form. So I think more than anything, this was just about trying to take the temperature down.
For what it's worth, Ramona Shelburne had a piece that came out today in which Jayson Tatum told her that he hasn't made a decision about whether he's going to return from a torn Achilles this season. He wants to, quote, get it right the first time. And it's apparently a lot to think about, which is reasonable. If you've torn an Achilles, that's a significant injury, and you should approach that comeback with a level of preparedness and caution. Anything else to make of all of this, Daniel or Justin?
I think it's important to point out that if he has any trepidation about stepping on Jalen's toes or stepping on any of the younger guys' playing time, he plays for the Celtics. It's a team sport, and they're there to win titles. So if he has an opportunity that he feels comfortable with, and that's the key part, comfortable, I think Bobby is completely right with the take the pressure down thing. I see this as him reclaiming some of the agency that has kind of been lost with the perception of inevitability of him returning. Just so that way, if he does feel that he's not ready, he's laid the groundwork to say, actually, no. But I don't think that if he's worried about individuals on this team or a group of individuals on this team, I think he's going to end up in the right place eventually once he thinks it through, because this isn't about individuals or groups of individuals. It's about the team and their goal.
Daniel, anything to add to all of this? You've been kind of in the scrum with all of these. You've been right up close and personal. What's your perspective?
Yeah, last night, Sam Hauser said that the team would obviously love to have him back. I mean, that kind of goes without saying. I mean, some people on social media are going to want to hear that, but like anybody paying attention obviously knows they want him to play. And Sam said they'd welcome him back with open arms. And most importantly, he said that at the end of the day, this decision's up to Tatum, and that no matter when he does come back, they can't wait for it. But just one last thing I will say, I was a little bothered by the Chris Haynes report. Like, he goes on NBA TV, whatever, mentions that for like 20 seconds. Obviously big news, but he doesn't get behind any of the reasoning of it. Like, there's nothing with, was it a chemistry issue? Yeah, was it injuries? No, he just said, well, it's up in the air now. There's no clarification. So then people are like, oh, did a setback happen? Like, all this speculation. And Joe, rightfully so, shut it down on Zolak and Bertrand. But that report just kind of irked me. It's like, whoa, what are we doing here?
I have 3 quick things to say on this. The first is we are going to repeat a mantra that is gospel on Havlicek Stole the Pod and in all of Celtics media. You will know when Adam Himmelsbach says you will know, and no sooner. That is what happens with the Boston Celtics. If Adam Himmelsbach says something is happening, it's happening. If he doesn't say anything is happening, it's not happening. If he doesn't say anything at all, nobody knows. That's how that works. So we're going to have to wait for that update. As far as, whether Jayson Tatum comes back this season or not, and the chemistry stuff, I'll just editorialize here and say that I am not worried about that at all, because I think Jayson Tatum and Jaylen Brown and Joe Mazzulla and Brad Stevens are all extremely professional, know exactly what this team is capable of, and I don't think there's going to be any ego or Tatum and Brown put aside the dueling banjos ego stuff a while ago, and then they won the title. So I think they're probably fine in that regard. I don't think we should be super worried about that as a major issue, Tatum stepping on toes or anything like that. There will inevitably be some chemistry stuff that will come with reintegrating a high usage, very talented player. There always is. I would not read into that as being like some problematic dynamic is emerging. I think it is just the reality of integrating a player back into a team after a long absence. There's always going to be some hiccups. The only thing to me that is really of interest in this story is what we're going to talk about next, which is how does the current state of Jayson Tatum's health affect the Celtics trade deadline plans? The trade deadline is next week. They have been linked with a lot of stuff. They've been rumored with a lot of stuff. There's been, all sorts of different ways that the Celtics could take this trade deadline, but it feels like Jayson Tatum's injury status is ultimately the driving force behind whatever they decide to do, whether they are buyers, sellers, or somewhere in between. That's almost exclusively going to be determined by what does Jayson Tatum's leg look like heading into these next few weeks. So we're going to kick things off for the second half of the pod now. But first, before we do that, it's time for the steal. Bobby, you get to take the pod wherever you want to take it. What are we talking about here?
Well, I am excited to get to the trade deadline gossip and what we all think about that front. But if we're doing the steal and we're hijacking the show a little bit to go left, then I'm curious to see what your assessment is of Amari Williams. This is a second-round pick on a two-way deal. And sometimes you can be a pseudo first-round pick because you were towards the early end. When you're 46th overall, I don't think you get that tag. So to see him play the way he has, where there's the bright spots, the growing pains, and the concerns about him finishing around the rim, I'm curious to see how you guys view him in this center equation, especially because that's such a focus point of where they might go at the deadline.
That's very interesting. I'll jump in. So with Amari Williams, he has shown some nice flashes. The pop, the athleticism, the shot blocking, that's all really good stuff. I think I've been fairly impressed with his rebounding and positioning. He's still very raw. I would not want to have to rely on Amari Williams to play in a high usage playoff series. He makes a few mental mistakes, which again, completely reasonable and expected for a rookie who has barely played this year. He's going to make mistakes. He's made some mental mistakes. The fouling is not awesome. And I feel like he's still very much figuring out like where is he supposed to be on the floor, who is he supposed to be boxing out. There are a lot of just like learning and getting comfortable with the speed of the game stuff that Amari Williams is currently working with. I think there are parts of his game that have real potential. Like the vertical stuff is real. He's got serious hops. I think there's a world in which he could be a pretty reliable rotation player for the Celtics long term. And, if the development of Nemesh Keita is anything to go by, give Amari Williams a couple of years and he could be a really good player. I don't think they should be planning on having Amari Williams be a heavy part of their center rotation for this postseason, because to me, that feels like a little bit of a bridge too far. But I'm curious to hear what the rest of y'all have to say.
His screens are amazing. I agree with everything that you said. And I went from thinking that he might have a future in the NBA to being pretty sure that he's going to have a future in the NBA. The question is just how much of a future is he going to have?
Yeah, last night was definitely not a bright spot for him. But I mean, like we're saying, he's a rookie. That's going to happen. And I think he's developing into a true NBA player faster than I thought. We talked about this like a lot over the offseason, like, oh, Celtic centers, like what's going to happen. And Amari's name always came up. And I thought he would get some run, but even this has surprised me. Like he's started multiple games now. I think he's held his own for the most part. And I agree with Alex. I think he does have a good future, but to rely on him will be a little shaky. But for now, I think they'll hold on to him.
this is the exact right time to play Amari Williams and try and figure out what you've got. Like January, February, maybe early March. This is when you should give a player like Amari Williams some run before those playoff rotations solidify, just so that you can understand like what he's capable of at this point. And then ideally, you're figured out what your big man rotation is by the playoffs, and maybe he'll factor it into it. Maybe he won't, but I do agree that it's reasonable to give him some run now and see what it looks like. Bobby, what do you think?
Yeah, I think so. It's worth noting that he's on a two-way deal. So they have an open roster spot. They'd have to convert him to be any part of the playoff equation. But between what time of year it is to Neemias Queta and Luka Garza both dealing with illnesses recently, that's another part that comes with this time of year. And so it was one part necessary, one part opportune, that right now, a little bit before the All-Star break, that he was able to get some run. And again, this is a player who there are very clear, impressive talents for a 7-footer. I mean, I talked to Mark Pope over the summer, the coach at Kentucky, and he noted how it felt like all of their primary ball handlers got injured. So they just said, Amari, we're running the offense through you. And they made a mini run in March Madness. And so he was able to shoulder that responsibility, to do that at 7 feet tall, to have a soccer background where you see the mobility, even as a drop big, is very impressive. And Mark Pope thinks that he can grow into a really impressive switchable center in time. So to see him with such a raw game and some glaring concerns that we've seen now as he gets more opportunities in the NBA, to see him play through those, and overall, I think I'd give him pretty positive grades considering the circumstances and the call up from the G League. I think it's very encouraging for Amari's future, and the fact that they might have hit on a contributor to their center rotation long term with that 46th overall pick.
I mean, Brad Stevens is really, really good at finding value in the late first and second rounds. That seems to have been kind of his calling card as a drafter. And, he's pretty much always there because the Celtics always seem to have picks in the high 20s, at least when he's been the GM. But, he has had a pretty good track record of this. And listen, if Queta and Ugo and Baylor Sharman and Sam Hauser and all of these guys are anything to go off of, the Celtics clearly have some pretty serious player development chops. So I think it's reasonable to expect that in a few years, Amari Williams could be a very solid NBA player. I'm just not sure that it's right now, because that's a lot to ask, at least for him to, be a playoff. Like, it's a lot to ask for Amari Williams to be like, all right, you're guarding Jalen Duren for 15 minutes here, buddy. That's a big ask, but who knows? We'll see what the Celtics center rotation looks like. Let's jump right into what the expectations are for this deadline. Of course, the Celtics have been linked to basically every available center that it seems like heading into this deadline. That's been pretty obviously their most glaring need. As good as Queta and Garza have played, I think it's fair to say that for the questions I have about Amari Williams' playoff viability, I also have questions about Luka Garza's, less so about Queta's, but you still need probably at least 3 playable front court guys for the postseason. So they are linked to a lot of different big men targets. Things that they can do include using the taxpayer MLE, which they have access to as they are no longer a second apron team. That's about $5.6 million. They also have the biannual exception, which is about $5.1 million. The Jaden Springer TPE from the trade last year, which is $4 million, along with a Drew Holiday TPE at $4.7 million. These are all lovely, but what they really have going for them is the Kristaps Porzingis trade exception, in which they basically sent Kristaps out for very little. They got George Niang back and immediately rerouted him to Atlanta, and then generated a $22.5 million trade exception. That is by far their most useful trade exception tool. They will have to pay a repeater tax situation, however, if they acquire, for example, a high salary player that goes into one of those trade exceptions, particularly the Porzingis trade exception. And even if they don't, if they send no salary out or very little salary out, they're definitely going to have to pay the repeater tax. Even if they do send out more salary, it's still definitely a possibility depending on the size of the contract that they might acquire.
No, they'll pay the repeater tax no matter what. They're going to end
Yeah.
up paying.
I guess that's
I think
true.
it's like 6-1 ish right now.
Yeah.
So for whatever they bring back above what they're paying, it's going to be that multiplier. So
that is, of course, if they acquire any high salary players. However, they could go the opposite direction and acquire only very small salary players, or simply acquire no additional salary. And that in that situation, they do not necessarily need to reset the repeater tax via trade. They can simply let Anthony Simons walk in free agency, or they can find other ways to do that by shedding salary. But there is a case for, so there's a case for them doing that, for basically getting under the first apron, getting out of the tax, and resetting the repeater tax entirely. We broke this down with Yossi in our last pod. But there's also, a real possibility that they will ignore that and try to acquire a player, say, repeater tax be damned, we don't care, we're trying to win. So there's kind of, for lack of a better word, I think there's basically three paths unfolding for the Celtics at the trade deadline. The first is acquire a high salary player using the Porzingis TPE, Anthony Simons expiring contract, probably go back into the repeater tax above the first apron, maybe even into the second apron, depending on how it goes. That's option one. Option two, acquire players via smaller deals using smaller TPEs, or with the Chris Boucher contract or the Xavier Tillman contract. Send out some of these smaller salary deals, maintain their current status, try to get under, or try to kind of keep things where they are. For the most part, don't trade Anthony Simons. Don't go for a big home run swing. Just try and shore up the roster as it exists. And then there's option three, which is shed salary, deal Anthony Simons into somebody else's space, get very little money back, try to deduct the tax, and reset the books. Those are kind of the three options. What would you say is the most likely on a scale of, say, 1 to 5, 1 being absolutely not, 5 being this is definitely happening for these three scenarios? We'll start with you, Bobby.
Sure. So I just think that the financial ramifications of acquiring Jaren Jackson Jr., even if that's something that they could work out a deal with Memphis, who, by the way, as much as they'd like to end the Ja Morant era, they could easily be of the mindset and leaning towards, we want to see what this looks like with Triple J without Ja Morant and continue to have him as one of our core building blocks. And so that is another factor in this equation as well, on top of just looking at it from a Boston lens. So as far as acquiring him goes, I don't think that's likely. And then Ivica Zubac, we've all seen the reporting that they discussed the potential framework and the Clippers were not interested. I have written about that all along, that it doesn't make sense to me that the Clippers would want to move off of their best young player in season while on a team-friendly contract. And so it certainly would come as a stunner if he gets moved.
Yeah.
Now, it does just take one team to get desperate and bowl them over, but I don't see it happening. And so then you look at smaller, more measured swings. And even though there might be internally some motivation of seeing the contract Anthony Simons has now and the pay cut he's in line for, even if the Celtics are the team that re-signs him over the summer. But again, I look at it and I say, they're going to have a long conversation about prospects like, do we give up a first-round pick for Yves Missi? I wouldn't be surprised if the decision there, that's a player I really like, and he's certainly not expensive on a rookie deal. That's also someone who they might want to prefer to keep that first-round pick within their treasure chest of assets. So to me, I think we're going to see the Celtics do something, but they have fallen in love with Anthony Simons. He gets rave reviews from every corner of that organization. And even though he becomes an option that it becomes harder to make a large scale deal with him next season, his contract is also more movable. I wouldn't be surprised if they keep him past the trade deadline. I know the report today from Chris Haynes as well. I wouldn't be surprised if Anthony Simons finishes out the season in Boston, and then there's an eye towards, can we re-sign him?
Sure. JQ, Daniel, what do we think?
Yeah, well, if you listened to our last episode, like Alex mentioned earlier, we definitely agreed with Bobby about Simons and him staying and maybe kicking the problem a little down further. But to go back to the options you listed, Alex, I would say number 2, maybe
Yeah.
working with like the smaller contracts and stuff, smaller money. I feel like that,
Seconded.
yeah, that feels the most likely.
Yeah.
1 taking a big swing, I mean, I just don't think so. Like with a guy like Jaren Jackson Jr., like Bobby said, I mean that I just don't see how that could really happen. It's also doesn't really seem worth it either. And like we mentioned before, and we've said it this a good amount, the biggest acquisition they could make is Tatum, really. Him coming
Yeah.
back. That doesn't require any kind of like trades or anything like that, obviously. So that might just be it. It might just be a little bit of a waiting game, maybe some small maneuvering, but I really
Yeah.
don't see them making a huge splash or completely selling. Like I think Simons will stay.
Brad Stevens has made big splashes before, of course. He has traded for Drew Holiday. He has traded for Kristaps Porzingis. It's not like he has never taken a big swing, but
Derek
typically
White
it
at the
feels,
deadline.
yeah, that's true.
Mhm.
Although I guess that was a Brad Stevens move. I thought that was no. You're absolutely right. That was a Brad Stevens move because Ime Udoka was the head coach there. So it's not like Brad Stevens is above taking a big swing at the deadline, but
Definitely.
it's very much also the case that like the market dictates what you're capable of, and I do think right now, with everything very much in a holding pattern as it relates to a big Greek fella and what he's going to be doing at the deadline, I do think there's not as many opportunities for those big swings right now. There might be many opportunities to be the third team in a different trade and acquire some other smaller contracts via facilitating. But we'll get into some other stuff related to that. First, we did mention, the Celtics were reportedly linked to Ivica Zubac. They reportedly offered Anthony Simons a first-round pick and a swap that was denied by the Clippers. And Bobby laid out pretty eloquently why. The Clippers are not trading Zubac because they've gone like what's been their record in the last 25 games? It's been absurd. They've been on a
I think
crazy hot streak.
Yeah, I think they're like I saw something like 16-3 in like the last 19 or something like that.
Yeah, that the Clippers are not going to be aggressively moving Ivica Zubac, or I think it's pretty fair to say at this point that Kawhi Leonard, James Harden, Zubac, those guys are staying in LA past the deadline, barring anything truly crazy. So not surprised by that. I've always thought, frankly, that was a stretch target. It really would only happen if the Clippers were truly imploding, and they're no longer. Reportedly, the Celtics also rejected a call of their own. The Chicago Bulls proposed Nikola Vucevic for Anthony Simons and a Celtics first-round pick, and the Celtics said, no, thank you. Thoughts on this rumored trade? Anybody?
Maybe
Yeah, I
if
mean,
they gave
you go ahead,
Boston a
Justin.
first-round pick. Sorry.
All you.
No, that's what I was saying. That's all I had to say was maybe if they gave Boston a first-round pick, it might be worth considering, depending on the pick. But at this point, yeah.
To me, it's a day late and a dollar short if you're the Bulls, because this offer, it might have been on the table over the summer and they didn't want to do it. And then you know what? It sounds pretty good. Are we all set to go here? I'll call it in, right? And it's no. I don't know if you've seen, but that ship has sailed. So I think that this was something that was realistic at one point, and by the time the Bulls came around to it, it was no longer the case.
I am okay with not burning a first-round pick for 35-year-old Nikola Vucevic. That strikes me as prudent GMing from Brad Stevens. Daniel?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I was going to agree with that. And also just say, like, Vucevic is at the Miles Turner School for being in trade talks nonstop and then nothing actually happening. Granted, something did eventually happen with Turner, but, like, this is ridiculous. This has been, like, what? Like 5 years of this with Vucevic or
pretty
something?
Much the entirety of his career on the Bulls.
Yeah, I'm tired of talking about that.
I don't see how, but somehow this ends with him being a Sacramento King.
God, that would be so
That's
dark.
Just the law of nature.
At that point, Nikola, maybe you start thinking about, Europe, I'm sure, is probably very nice and would pay you very handsomely to, get some run on one of their better teams. I hear Madrid.
There was a spot earmarked for Jonas Valanciunas that it didn't go there, so maybe that's his destiny.
Yeah. There are some other rumors that the Celtics have been linked to. Of course, Shams has been all over this, saying that the Celtics are looking for a starting center. It should be said, have a starting center. But, if you can get another starting center for a good deal, why not? Bobby mentioned Yves Missi, a target that I would be very interested in the Celtics acquiring for a number of different reasons. The Pelicans are shopping him, but they want a first-round pick. So to me, Bobby, you mentioned there's probably some internal debate about like whether the Celtics would be comfortable giving up a first-round pick for Yves Missi. Feels like the needle to thread here is you give up not a completely unprotected first-round pick, right? You either give them a protected first or you give them a swap or something of that nature, like protected 1 through 8. I don't know. With the
a 31st pick, maybe.
Yeah, something like that.
Non-guaranteed money is pretty sexy lately.
It's true. I mean, and maybe they'll say no to that, but with all due respect to the New Orleans Pelicans, not sure y'all should really be saying no to offers for any sort of picks at this point, given how things are going. Any thoughts on the possibility of Yves Missi for a first round pick of some kind?
Yeah, one, the Pelicans are negotiating in public. Of course, they're going to say, we need a first round pick to get him, and they might hold firm on that. We'll see. If you're any team interested, which according to Michael Scotto from Hoops Hype, there's a lot of them. Not a surprise. He's a good young player who's now, he doesn't seem like the best fit alongside Derek Queen. He's not a three-point shooter, but look, the Celtics had interest in Zubac, and they're certainly making it work at a pretty impressive rate with Nemish Keita. So to me, that's one where whether or not it's worth giving up a first round pick is in the eye of the beholder. And we'll see what the people in the room, the decision makers for the Celtics, decide there, if they're willing to meet that price. I also wonder if they would offer something like a second round pick and a young player on their roster specifically. I say that with Baylor Shireman in mind. Maybe there's listeners right now who hate that prospect and would vehemently disagree. Maybe there's people in the Celtics organization that feel that same way and echo that sentiment. But I just wonder how strongly they feel about Yves Missi, how much they feel like we're not giving up a first round pick for a player who's not in a higher tier of category of center. And then ultimately, would they try to circumnavigate that by including a player like Shireman?
And of course, also has to be said, there might be other teams that would be willing to give up that first round pick for Yves Missi for a player like him. A lot of different factors going around here at the deadline, but just kind of scanning through the list of teams that are looking for a starting center, there's definitely at least a few teams out here that feel like Yves Missi could make a lot of sense with them. I'm looking at you, Los Angeles Lakers, among other things.
Pacers too.
Yeah, that's that. Although I don't know if the Pacers are going to be burning any picks at this point, but
I don't think they want to see more wins come their way this season.
Yeah.
No, but they were talking about doing something with Mathurin, I think.
Yeah,
I think
they do need to trade Mathurin by all accounts, but that would be interesting. More. Just a Mathurin Missi swap. I could kind of see that, but I think that would be. I think they probably want a little more than that. We'll see. Another center that the Celtics have been linked to is Nick Richards of the Phoenix Suns. Apparently, the Suns are looking to shed salary and duck the tax, despite having a pretty good year here. They're 28-19, which is just one win differential from the Boston Celtics. Man, playing in the West does not sound fun. But yeah, so the Suns are reportedly looking to dump Nick Richards. There's some talk that the Celtics would be interested in trading away potentially Chris Boucher for Nick Richards.
They're interested in him too, from what I understand from Scotto's reporting. Yeah.
All right. So what do we think about that as a possibility, folks?
Yeah, I think it makes all the sense in the world that we talked about the degree of skepticism around some of the bigger names that get more attention. But ultimately, I mean, look, to cross sports here, the New England Patriots were sellers at the trade deadline. And I wonder if with the Celtics, if they can find a team of interest who would take Chris Boucher, who's just not a part of the rotation, then that's something I think they'd be happy to do. And if they can either in the same deal or separately move a little bit of money off the books, find a new home for a player like that, and acquire an option to fortify that center rotation, someone like a Nick Richards, that's a realistic plan to me. And sometimes it's the name that doesn't get discussed, but as we cover a lot of ground here, Nick Richards is a very realistic target, in my opinion.
It should be said, yeah, it should be said also that Chris Boucher has drawn some interest from the Hawks 76ers as well. There's definitely a possibility that a move like that could happen. Richards, of those three teams, would probably be the team that is most likely to make sense as a target. I mean, the 76ers do have Andre Drummond. I don't know that that would be like a high priority, but if you're looking for a vet big, I guess Andre Drummond also shoots threes now. If the market, if the last few matchups with the Celtics are to be believed, so maybe he fits better in Joe Mazzulla's system than we thought. Yeah, and the Hawks are also linked to Chris Boucher. Not sure that they have any obvious center targets who they'd be willing to give away for Chris Boucher, unless they're trying to do perhaps a larger deal with one of their centers. But that is neither here nor there. It also has been mentioned by James Ham on the Locked On Kings podcast that the Celtics are interested in Keon Ellis, who is attracting a lot of attention at the deadline. He's effectively out of the Kings rotation despite being pretty darn good perimeter defender. He is undersized and his offense definitely is not awesome, but he does bring some serious perimeter defense chops to the table. Would this make sense for the C's to go after a Keon Ellis, Bobby?
I'm a big Keon Ellis fan, and he's also a very good three-point shooter. Sacramento, they kind of boxed themselves in where the root of this, and this is going to hurt them in trade leverage, is that they can't pay Keon Ellis and they couldn't come to terms. They were well short because they brought in Zach LaVine at a high figure. They have Malik Monk. They needed a point guard, so they went out and they targeted Dennis Schroeder, and then they signed Russell Westbrook on top of that. So even though Keon Ellis, I'd rather have him than some of the names I just mentioned, especially when you factor in their salaries. Sacramento is boxed in, and he seems likely to move, in my opinion, Ellis. And it's important to note that he's not much of a ball handler or a shot creator. Him and Simons, maybe they end up together, and that's an upgrade. I think the minutes that would all of a sudden go to Keon Ellis from other people not named Anthony Simons. And then in the summer, you could probably re-sign him for around the same rate and probably cheaper than Simons could cost. And so it's a good fit for this team. It could be more realistic to keep him long-term than Simons. And maybe even the Celtics feel emboldened where we have a deal in place for Keon Ellis, and that empowers us, even though, again, they would lose Simons' ball handling and shot creation, and that would have to be something they find a way to address. Maybe it does embolden them on a Simons trade, but these two guys, because their skill sets offensively are different, and they're certainly different caliber of defenders, maybe they ultimately come out of the deadline with a player like Ellis and Simons together on the roster. Although one final point in this long-winded rant, as Alex has noted previously, when someone has a lot of interest, other franchises might be willing to pay a higher price than you to get that individual.
That sure is true. The one thing I will say as well is that I think Keon Ellis is a kind of player that Boston would potentially need to be careful in acquiring, because there are some redundancies with Hugo Gonzalez and his game. And I feel like given how well Gonzalez has played, and given that it feels like there is a long-term plan for him to be, in play for this team, I do kind of wonder if it would be worth maybe sitting out of the Keon Ellis sweepstakes to give Ugo that run and let him kind of develop a little bit more. I'm curious about your thoughts on that, JQ and or Daniel.
I do think that you have a point. I also think that there's been a lot of chatter that, like, if they went for Ellis, that this would mean that Simons is likely gone. But I agree with Bobby that if anyone were to be gone from, people can't really handle the ball, kind of plays more of a defensive role. Not that we expected him to. The three-point shooting is coming around, but I'm talking about Baylor Shireman. If he is going to be going out, that might be a replacement.
Yeah, and I think the big thing comes back to need. And I still think the biggest need doesn't have to do with Keon Ellis. It'd be more the 5 spot. But getting him, it'd be kind of like an embarrassment of riches situation. Like him, and somehow if you still have Ugo, that defense would be so tenacious and You just add Joe Mazzulla's coaching into the mix. I think he could really thrive in that system. But do they need him necessarily? I don't think so. So that makes me think they might not take a swing at it, like we were saying about Ugo's minutes especially. But to think about, it would be nice, and I think it could work.
We talked about some other rumors earlier with regard to Jaren Jackson. I think we're all fair in saying that we're not buying what Matt Moore of Hardwood Paroxysm is saying in the Jaren Jackson to Boston rumors. Is that fair?
I think
Yeah.
the Celtics, if I had to guess, I think they like the player. He'd be a terrific fit. But the contract and some of the concerns of one, the roster and financial ramifications, and two, what happens if this doesn't work, whether that's an
Right.
injury or you find yourself running an offense where he is the player that teams are willing to tip their cap if he's making his threes that night, and that ultimately the Celtics are worse off for that. I think the concerns are so significant that as well as he would fit, as much as they might like the player, I ultimately don't think it happens.
Yeah, I'm not betting on it either. It's just too much money. That's the reality of it. If you're going to go all in for a player, I think there's a number of players that Boston would want to get. I'm not sure Jaren Jackson is the kind of player that you should, cash in everything for. We'll see. There are some other players that are available at the deadline that people are definitely thinking about cashing in everything for. So listen, I know it's not really on the rundown, but we kind of got to talk about Giannis Antetokounmpo, the biggest trade target available potentially as of the last couple of days. Shams is saying that the divorce papers are coming in hot, that Giannis could be moved potentially at this trade deadline. The Warriors are linked. The Heat are linked. The Timberwolves are linked. Who else is linked? Et cetera, et cetera. All these teams are linked. The Knicks, right. What are we supposed to make of this? Is there any chance that Giannis is going to get dealt within the next 10 days?
So there's almost like an emotional sentiment, if you will, compared to a more pragmatic one, which is from the former side of things. It just feels like it's time for a divorce. They have laid some pretty substantial breadcrumbs for the fan base to get their arms around this. And it's reached a point where they're booing him at home games and he's booing back at them. So it seems like everyone is ready for the divorce to happen and to sign those papers, Alex. On the other side of it is the reality that teams closely linked to this, like the Heat and the Knicks, they can offer more draft capital over the summer if you're willing to wait. But I think that there's going to be offers there worth accepting. I think the Warriors, it's been a lot of reports that they'll basically say, what do we need to pay to make this happen? And they have the draft capital to entice them and say, you don't need to wait. Plus, the Bucks could hurt themselves in this equation by holding him for one fewer playoff run for an acquiring team and the risk of a re-injury if he finishes out the stretch in Milwaukee. So ultimately, I understand teams like the Knicks and the Heat, they can make more compelling offers over the summer, but it just takes one team to come up with something good enough, and it seems like a few of them are compelled to do so.
Any thoughts on Giannis, fellas?
The Minnesota Rumbles are very interesting. They don't really have anything in the way of picks that they could trade, but the talent they have on the roster, I think, could probably be as competitive or more competitive than any realistic deals that would happen in season. So I'll be watching that carefully.
And they could take some of the players that they have as part of a Giannis package and redirect them to other teams to acquire picks. It does have to be said, Minnesota Timberwolves have some big men that could be rerouted in a potential Giannis acquisition. Nice read.
One's they're shopping. Oh no, I mean that would be nice, yeah. But they are theoretically shopping another one.
That's true. They are theoretically shopping. They're theoretically shopping Julius Randle and Rudy Gobert, both of whom.
No, I meant on the other side. The other side.
Yes, that's true. Milwaukee is shopping theoretically Bobby Portis among others, and is potentially interested in Anthony Simons as a possible return. Anthony Simons for Bobby Portis does not feel like a great trade to me. What do you guys think?
I mean, Sunday I'm going to be
hard no.
Yeah, I would say no. Sunday I'm going to be watching for some awkwardness or whatever because the Bucks are coming to town. I don't know if Giannis is going to be in the building because he's hurt, whatever.
Mhm.
But Bobby Portis should be there, and maybe we'll get some sense of the mood going on. But yeah, like Bobby said, like you guys said, I mean, Simons for an aging Bobby Portis doesn't seem worth it. Bobby and Joe Mazzulla might fight the first day of practice too. They probably like each other, but
Or maybe not. I mean, anybody who sends a teammate to Europe permanently, I'm a little worried about their potential integration into the Celtics kind of perspective.
Yeah.
Even with the fighting, being a selling point to Joe, potentially.
The Anthony Simons to Bucks rumors have been pretty persistent. I do kind of wonder, though, that feels like that might be more three-teamer related than anything. But I don't know. I'd be surprised if he's dealt in a straight-up trade for various Bucks players, but we'll see. Players that are also in the Eastern Conference Central Division that the Celtics have been linked to, sort of, maybe, at least by us, are Ayo Dosunmu and Kobe White, both of whom are, drawing interest from a number of different teams. In fact, I'm pretty sure Kobe White is drawing significant interest in the last couple of days. There's a team that I'm pretty sure he's already linked to. Is that right? Do we have that? I'm pulling that up right now.
You're referring to the Timberwolves?
Yes,
that's
right. Yeah. So Kobe White makes a lot of sense for the Minnesota Timberwolves. Now, admittedly, so does Anthony Simons. So there is a world in which, I don't know, for example, Anthony Simons could be headed to the Minnesota Timberwolves, Kobe White could be headed to the Boston Celtics, and a secret third thing could be headed to the Chicago Bulls. That is on the table. Jalen Smith, also a player on the Chicago Bulls, that's garnered some interest, particularly for one Dr. Justin Quinn. So let's break that down. Is there a realistic path to acquiring Ayo Dosunmu or Kobe White or Jalen Smith or any of these kind of Bulls guys that are in Bulls purgatory?
So let's start with. Okay, well, so I'll try to be quick here. Not my strong suit, but Kobe White reportedly turned down a 4-year, $87 million contract over the summer. So the idea that he's going to end up in Boston doesn't make sense to me. And, even the idea of a three-team construct where the Celtics are giving up Anthony Simons and the return is Kobe White, I don't see that as realistic or palatable. Dosunmu is a great option. He's a player I like a lot, and he's really come along as a three-point shooter. And the problem there is that I think he's going to stay with the Bulls. Even it might have been Jake Fisher, I believe, if I'm remembering correctly, said that that's an organization that values having local talent. He's from the area, and he's easier to retain than Kobe White. So I think Kobe White probably gets dealt. Minnesota, like you said, Alex, makes a lot of sense. But ultimately, I think Dosunmu stays put. Jalen Smith, put him in the category of Nick Richards of realistic and a chance to add to that center position for a price that they'd be willing to pay and a contract that makes sense to put on the books if you're adding money.
Yeah, Ayo Dosunmu, I'm a little surprised that he hasn't gotten more interest, but maybe that's because the Bulls are just flat out rejecting calls or asking for a lot for him. He's a pretty darn good player, and I feel like would be worth keeping. The Orlando Magic are potentially looking to shed salary and duck the tax. The notes here say Tyus Jones could be of interest as an Anthony Simons replacement. Respectfully, I'm not going to agree with that. Tyus Jones has had.
It's not saying he is. It's asking.
Yeah, maybe so. I'm not buying that. Tyus Jones has had
the shooting is terrible this year.
Tough season here.
That could be a problem.
Yeah, I don't know. We'll see. Thoughts on? I have always kind of been like a why is there so much hype around career backup Tyus Jones guy? But what do I know?
If we're going to get someone from Orlando, I'm more interested in one of their big men, any of whom I think would be a realistic target other than maybe Wendell Carter, who I've even heard floated as a potential trade target to get out of the tax.
Yeah.
Well, I think Goga is probably the most realistic of them.
Guy.
Yeah. I mean, I wouldn't say I'm a Goga guy, but I could live with that. I could see the fit. There's some pretty, like the screening, the constant fouling. There's some issues too, but he does do things that would be helpful for Boston.
Another issue with Goga is he seems to do a lot better when he's afforded the chance to start and play a lot of minutes. compared to a bench role. So if you're trying to fit him in to a rotation with Keita and Garza, his history says that's not the way to get the most out of him.
So a couple of other things, then we'll get out of here. So Scotto reports that Celtics had Scotto. Apologies. Reports that the Celtics had interest in signing Daron Sharp, but might not be interested in pursuing him at the deadline. To me, that's more so saying the Brooklyn Nets know what they have in Daron Sharp and are not planning on trading him, which is reasonable. He's a good player. Let's see. Christian Clark of The Athletic mentions that Toronto, Atlanta, and Boston are all interested in Daniel Gafford.
No,
adding
does not say that.
mentions that they're interested in adding a big and then throws Daniel Gafford's name out there as a possibility. Mavericks, a little confusing. Don't really know what their plan is. Feels like a lot is tied up in what do they do with Anthony Davis and how soon is Kyrie Irving come back. That's going to dictate a lot of what happens there. We will see. And then there's been some aggregation and confusion around the status of Paolo Banchero in the Orlando Magic. It has been aggregated that Paolo might be on Boston's radar as a potential deadline acquisition, along with the Chicago Bulls, as Orlando is looking to cut salary. And Paolo has had a pretty tough year reintegrating with a team that had pretty high expectations and has had a lot of injuries, but Paolo's definitely not playing his best basketball right now. That being said, feels awfully hard for the Boston Celtics to go out and acquire Paolo Banchero. I'll say it. Any thoughts on that?
I think we already shot that one down in the chat a bit.
Exactly. It feels difficult to pull off. I don't know if he's who they would want on that third mega contract alongside of the Jays. And I don't see it.
Yeah, I'm not betting on it. Let's put it that way. There are no rumors linking the Boston Celtics to this player that Justin wants to talk about. Justin?
I just think that if we are going to go for someone who isn't being mentioned, which, kind of fits the sort of player that bought. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Oh, you just
froze for a second on a pretty great thumbnail pic.
Yeah.
Okay, so starting over, we know that the Celtics move in silence. If they are going to go for a guy we haven't been hearing about that might be someone who could probably lose, we've talked about this before with Ciro Oseo on a previous podcast. Santi Aldama is the guy I would like them to go after. I think he makes the most sense for a higher salary guy that is still affordable and also realistic if they're going to go for a bigger name. Probably they're not going to, but just putting that out into the ether again.
We are all Santi Aldama fans here, and I think that would be a great move. We
Ugo
will see,
would like
Brad. Ugo would certainly like it. Brad Stevens, as we know, moves in silence, so I'm certain that every candidate that the Celtics have been linked to will not be playing for the Boston Celtics this year, and he will find some player that we haven't even remotely considered and acquire them at the deadline for a deal that is probably reasonable, but ultimately pretty good, because that is the Brad Stevens special. Let's get out of here. Something to remember or something to forget. Bobby, as a reminder, this can be about basketball. It can be about the Celtics. It can be about your life. It can be about the world. It can be wherever you want to take it. We're going to model and you're going to get the last word. Something to remember or something to forget. Daniel or Justin, who's going first?
I'll drop the heavy stuff first, since that just seems to be my job here at this point of the podcast. A lot of people really have been wanting NBA players to take a stronger stand with their platform on the things that are going on in this country, particularly in Minnesota. Do yourself a favor and listen to Victor Wembanyama on this particular topic. He really highlighted why he both feels it's important as a player of color who is not a U.S. resident, but he also feels threatened by the possibility of reprisals for speaking out. And he's Victor fucking Wembanyama. So maybe be a little more patient with our favorite basketball players. And remember, they are both basketball players and people get scared. And it's great when we can be brave and we feel that we have the place to be able to do so. But don't get mad at people if they're not doing the thing you want them to do.
Daniel?
Yeah, well, to Justin's point, Yabusele had some good stuff to say about that too. But for my something to remember, I'll just keep it pretty simple in that Jayson Tatum, Jaylen Brown, these are two guys we both need to celebrate. And clearly, they can work together. We've seen it happen 2024, every year before. We've seen it happen. It can work. So don't worry about that too much. And just celebrate these guys because Boston got lucky with them. I mean, they really lucked out, and they're not going to be here forever. Like, it's crazy to think that Jaylen Brown's in his 10th year and Tatum has been in the league like what 8-9 years. Like, it's a long time, and they're not going to be here forever. So enjoy it now.
I got to remember to stop scheduling so many things to happen on weeknights because I'm 32 and I can't keep doing this to myself, having dinner at 9:30 because I have signed up for 6 different things on a Thursday evening. Bobby, close us out of here.
Yeah, and Alex, that's after the trek home. So you burning calories and not replacing them with any nutrients.
It's a mess
tough go.
over here.
As far as mine, I'm going to put it in the middle, and then we'll all know which way to slot it when the time comes, and that is the Patriots being in the Super Bowl. Is that going to be something to remember or something to forget? Time will tell, but that's what I'm going with for this. We shall see if it's a celebration or something to just put in the rear view as a distant memory and forget all about it.
Very interesting. Bobby, where can we find your work these days?
Appreciate that. You can find me over at Forbes as well as Hardwood Houdini and feeding my Twitter addiction at Bobby Krivitsky.
Daniel, where can we find your work these days?
Yeah, you can find me on Twitter, DanielD1214. Keep up with Bobby and I. There'll be plenty of stuff tomorrow and Sunday. And then you can find it right here, Havlicek Stole the Pod or Celtics Wire or Clutch Points.
JQ, where can we find your work?
Well, you can find it at the Celtics Wire place. Wherever you're listening to or watching this, that's another good place. And you will not be finding me at a Divine Sweater concert anytime too soon because it's kind of far away and I'm kind of scared to go into the United States right now. Sorry. But you should go if you hear one because Alex is the bassist.
It's true. You can find my work on Divine Sweater, all streaming platforms and or social media and all of that stuff. We'll let you know. We don't have any shows coming up anytime soon, but if that changes, we'll keep you posted. And then if you want to find my general life stuff, you can follow me on Instagram or Blue Sky, whatever. I don't care. And if you want to hear basketball takes, well, folks, then you just got to turn into another episode of Havlicek Stole the Pod.